gathered here for this very interesting expert-led session by Nitasha. Nitasha's session is titled as Gender Equality at Work and Is It Achievable? Allow me to give a brief description about Nitasha. Nitasha is an accomplished and highly experienced gender equality specialist and experienced professional with a wealth of knowledge and capabilities within the government as well as public entities. She is skilled at partnering with business management in order to manage operational requirements and build top performing teams to achieve corporate objectives. She is accomplished in developing a diverse and inclusive work environment with solid experience in program design and development. She's an expert in gender equality and social justice and has an extensive network with donors and key partners in various sectors, both nationally and internationally. Nitasha is a lot of things. She's a lecturer, she's a research associate, and she's been a director of of the National School of Government, Pretoria, South Africa. She's also managed various programs across her journey in the development sector. And we are very grateful to have Nitasha today at the Changemaker 20 Summit under the theme of gender equality and women's empowerment, especially. And Nitasha has been extremely cooperative and proactive in her response because this was decided very last moment. But she's very graciously agreed to host this session, to lead this session today. Nitasha, I welcome you once again to the Changemaker 20 Summit. We are very happy to have you here. Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alicia. I'm now just going to share my screen. Can you just let me know when you can see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you everyone for attending today. My theme is on gender equality at work. Is this achievable? My name is Professor Nitasha Ramparsad. I am speaking to you from South Africa. I just want to get a sense of, what it is that you think about these two themes. What is equality and what is inclusion? Alicia, if I can just ask you to just read some of the comments in the chat because I can't see it once I'm sharing my screen. So if we can just take a minute to reflect on these two things. What is equality and what is inclusion?
As of now, we have Dr. Aarti, who is very happy to be a part of the summit, and she's very thrilled to be listening to you. I'll let you know if we have responses to the questions you've asked.
Okay, great. Okay, well, if I can just give a short description. Basically, equality is looking at how people are given space in a particular organization, even at your dining room table. But your inclusion is different. Inclusivity is looking at if you have an equal number of people at the table who are perhaps men, women, people who are disabled, people from the LGBTQI community, what voice do these people have? And that voice is what inclusion is. The extent to which people are included in decision making and the extent to which people are able to articulate their own needs in that space. The workplace is very culturally diverse and extremely influenced by these kinds of elements. For example, the community that a person comes from, their culture, their language, their heritage, the societal group that they fall into, whether they have a sporting interest, their religion. These kinds of things make up the elements that create a diverse workforce. And diversity, cultural diversity in particular, is often just glossed over as an additional element under the blanket of diversity. However, cultural diversity is a major element that affects how people are treated in a workplace. I just wanted to check what your opinion is. What, in your view, are the factors that limit equality and inclusion in the workplace? Perhaps, Alicia, you can share some of your experience. We were chatting before I started to present. What are the factors that limit equality?
I have only been working for the past 2 years now.
What is your experience?
During these times also, I think I have had several instances to sort of reflect about the concept of equality in workplace. So, first of all, in one of my previous work experiences, the lack of proper, washrooms for women, first of all, and the expectation from people, especially men in the upper management, to sort of adjust, quote unquote. And there were no washrooms in a particular scenario, and there was no water in a particular scenario in the washroom. So, and there was an expectation which was very unrealistic for them to for the women to sort of be okay with that. And we had to sort of spell it out and explain that why do we require these two very basic things right now. And first of all, that was an eye opener for me, at least, like, oh really, that these are basic requirements in a particular place, and I am having to explain it to somebody so in such a detail that please give me a proper washroom and please give me proper water to sort of sustain here. So that is one that, when you pose this question, that sort of immediately came into my mind. And I think this I think this is coming in the top of my head, that is there. And yeah, I think this is very basic, but this has been, and it has held a lot of importance with me. Like, I want to tell them that this is not how it should work. And in a very much bigger level, I think uh, many companies, many organizations over here, we still don't have the access to period leaves, which makes us go to workplace with severe cramps, or sort of have to take leaves, and that gets cut from our leave balance, etc. So that also is not at all inclusive, in my opinion. I think I'll stop with these two examples only.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing your experience. With regards to the washroom issue in South Africa, when we took over as a democratic republic in 1994, there were no washrooms for women in parliament. This had to be built because parliament was seen as a space for men. So this has also been something that South Africa had to, navigate and get through. And I think that it's great that you actually spoke up and demanded a basic human right like a washroom and like, water. With regards to health leave, each organization is different in how they treat this, but a health issue has to be raised as something that must be taken seriously in the workplace. In South Africa, we have very progressive legislation with regards to our constitution, employment equity, health and safety, basic conditions of service. But you still find that in some areas and in some organizations, these are not being provided. I think that, we have to also look at the role of the employee in making sure that those kinds of larger policies and legislations are pushed so that workplaces are held accountable. And I think the main message of my talk today is that accountability by an organization can only be implemented if people are holding that workplace accountable. So here I'm going to talk about the role of management. So the most show-stopping consequence is little or no budget allocated to a particular project or initiative. So even if you go forward with great plans and initiatives, it's going to be difficult for you to implement those initiatives without a progressive budget and without sufficient resources. And it's not just budget in the monetary sense, but also for people. What kind of human resources can be placed to make sure that that particular project goes forward? So your senior management has to truly support a particular initiative. Otherwise, those particular project goals cannot be met, and therefore people have to move together. You also have to have cooperation from other functions. So gender equality in the workplace, it can be achievable, but these are the elements that have to be in place. The first element that I spoke of was about senior management buy-in. The second is around cooperation from other functions. So in South Africa, we have, within the state, we have things called gender desks. Gender desks are meant to ensure that gender equality happens at the state level, and they're supposed to also police other sectors, the private sector, NGOs, through what we call Chapter 9 institutions. So the Chapter 9 institution that we have is called the Commission for Gender Equality. They are meant to monitor and support initiatives for gender equality in the workplace. This is also not a women's issue. I want to emphasize this very strongly, and I will speak about this a bit later, but gender equality affects men, women, and also people who fall under LGBTQI. In order to get your projects and your programs into action, you have to get the cooperation of other functions. So you have to look at what significant other units are placed in your particular organization and who can provide cross-functional cooperation. Who are the sort of the bosses in those functions? Who are on the boards? Who can enable you to move your ideas forward with sufficient support? I now want to talk about something that people don't speak about, which is toxic masculinity. Before this, Alicia and I were just candidly talking about how masculinity in this particular age is affecting men. So with the advent of online media and social media, there is a perceived reality about how men should be. What are the things that they should have? What kind of car should they drive? What kind of house should they live in? What kind of salary should they have? And this toxic masculinity, around how men should behave in the workplace. Real men don't cry. They're not allowed to show any emotions. This is meant to create a plateau where men are supposed to behave in a particular way. In South Africa, for example, we have a high rate of suicide between men between the ages of 18 and 35. This is in the youth. Youthful men are being lost because they are held to a standard that they cannot attain. And this is also pushed by a toxic culture that we see in social media, how men should be performing. And this is often not true. What people see in social media is really an ideal and often not the truth of how other people are actually living. Toxic femininity also exists. We have something called pull her down syndrome. So women at the top are not allowed to be celebrated. They are almost shunted and almost they're not revered. They are not looked at as enablers for other women. And so what women at the lower levels do, or middle management, is that they try to pull her down. So this is why the pull her down syndrome has been theorized. We also have something around, excessive girl power. Excessive girl power to the exclusion of all other women has a very heterosexual focus, and so does toxic masculinity, has a very heterosexual norm for men that men and women are meant to aspire to. In the extreme right-hand picture, you'll see a picture of a woman lifting somebody up on a couch who is supposedly her partner, having to clean, having to support their spouse, look after children. And this is still a norm that we see, even though women are now allowed to be educated, they are allowed to work. This social norm in our private spaces still continues. And that undoing can only happen in the private space. So people often think that a piece of legislation or a workplace policy is the key. Actually, I will challenge you that at your barbecue stand, at your dinner table, when you are having a party, look at the roles of men and women and try to look at the cultural norms that you can influence. This is something that tends to be very contentious in conservative cultures. And my challenge to you is that every generation has the responsibility to determine what their culture is. Every generation has that particular responsibility. So what is the solution making? The organizational reforms have to be supported. You have to have policies and practices. So not just fancy policies, but looking at how do we actually implement those policies, and real mainstreaming. This is beyond having a Women's Day event or a Women's Day, gala dinner. I love gala dinners. It doesn't mean that I'm shunting. I am looking down on that. I myself, enjoy a party, but that is not real mainstreaming. Real mainstreaming is looking at what are the requirements for men and women in the workplace, especially now in this particular generation where we see high incidence of divorce, lots of single parents, and how is it that the workplace is supporting people inclusively in terms of sexuality, their culture, their geographical location. These elements will make a more equitable space in the workplace. There are opportunities for progress. I would look at developing a workplace action plan. Each workplace will have their own unique needs. There's a policy development element that I think that people need to look at. For example, bursaries. How are bursaries meted out? You'll find that a particular group receive bursaries every year. Rotational travel. If you think about who goes on a golf tour every year, it's the same group of people that go on a golf tour. So look at a rotational travel. And golf often is not about actually playing golf. Golf is more about networking and socializing. And those who play golf can confirm this. Performance agreements are also an easy win for ensuring a more inclusive workplace. Your performance agreement can have indicators that include elements where you are forcing people to work across teams. So looking at, for example, how many projects are you delivering cross-functionally? How many men and women are you including? How many people are you including from other provinces or states? And then the codes of conduct. Most workplaces have codes of conduct, but this is often ignored. So you have to look at a code of conduct that is inclusive, that is looking at how people are treated, the language that people are allowed to speak. So often sexist jokes are acceptable in the workplace, and this is something that can only be undone if people are confronted about their poor behavior. An inclusive agenda is very important for an organization where you look at leadership versus management. So you can have various managers, but they are not leaders. They are not leading change. They are not inspiring people to move from where they are. And this inclusive agenda can only be pushed by senior managers. However, this is something that can happen at all levels. A leader can be at any space. And so I'm encouraging you to look at how it is that you can inspire others and how it is that you can also hold your senior managers accountable to ensure a more equitable space for you. Gender mainstreaming needs a support structure. Remember, gender mainstreaming, as I have spoken about earlier, it must include men, women, LGBTQI. What support structure do you currently have? And if so, is it capable of fulfilling all its tasks successfully? So look at your structure, look at the resources for that structure. What are the competencies that are needed, and what position does it hold within that particular organization? It's senseless having a gender structure and then it doesn't have any real power. So look at positioning this perhaps at your exco level where that particular forum can have a space. Your gender equality objectives, look at what kind of objectives you want to achieve. This is also a long-term project. I was explaining earlier that your gender equality objectives are organizational specific. Before COVID, women were 100 years away from achieving the same as men in terms of their salaries, being paid the same for the paid work. However, after COVID, we are now 200 years away. So COVID has now affected the development of women and the equality of the wage gap. So I think this would be even further for LGBTQI. You have to look at what kind of established and well-defined gender equality objectives do you want. And I have given some examples of a rotational travel policy, as well as a bursary scheme, where you actually have specific targets for various people within your organization. You also look at which objectives are ambitious and which are realistic. So which ones can you actually achieve within the year, and which perhaps are realistic in the next 3 to 5 years. You must also look at what is the most effective and practical way of developing and agreeing on those gendered objectives. So you have to have buy-in from all levels in order for your particular objectives to be met. How can you manage this change? So change is difficult, especially for conservative cultures. Gather information about and determine ways to communicate the reasons for the changes. You must include the changing economic environment. So look at, what kind of dollar power can you put behind that? What is your changing competitive environment? What are the customer needs? What are your particular expectations? Do you have any vendor capabilities who can support your goals? Are there government regulations that you can use to support your change? And then look at your demographics. So don't preach a particular message to people that cannot be accepted. Look at your resource availability as well as elements of language, their geographics, and look at how you're going to manage this change so that it can be as palatable as possible. When planning this, you have to assess the potential impact on your organization processes, your systems, your customers, and your staff. So, for example, if you are forcing a particular team to work cross functionally, how is that going to play out? Assess the risks and also have a particular improvement or mitigation plan. Your communication plan for a change is possibly the most important because people often are told what the new change is, and you don't want that for yourself. You would want a change where people understand the context, they understand the reasons for the new indicators in their performance agreement, they understand a new clear expectation of their roles and responsibilities, and then the expectations regarding improved measurements and rewards. Also, you need people to walk the talk. So senior and middle managers, they need to represent these particular objectives, and they have to manage this with a compelling vision of how how culture matters, and how leadership on the front line also matters. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to now just reflect on any takeaways
Thank you,
that the
Natasha. I'll
group
just
has on this
read out a few
particular
comments
presentation.
that
Thank you
Dr.
very
Aarti
much.
and Jan have made. Um, and I'll definitely I have something to say about this as well, which I'll continue. So there's a lot of appreciation for Nitasha, and Dr. Aarti has said that equality is giving opportunity to people who were previously disadvantaged or not allowed access. Inclusion is giving them the ability to make decisions too and to be fully included in having a voice. Women not being given a right to make decisions, not allowing women to speak without being interrupted or being spoken down to, discrimination when it comes to women needing special concessions for children activities, medical appointments, school activities, and leave, etc. I think all of these amount to inequality in the workplace. So many issues that need to be discussed and solved to give women their rightful place as equals in the workplace. Women being put in leadership positions without the right training being given to succeed. She's also said that gala dinners are great, but they are not effective, and there are no courageous conversations or openness happening in those dinners. Even the speakers in various events, they do a more of a motivational speech rather than impact on actual issues. And yes, there is more. There's a question also: how do you address bullying in the workplace when it comes to women? I think we'll take up the questions in a while. I personally want to say that I think one thing that struck me towards the end of your presentation was talking about the risk and mitigation plans within the organization as well. So, what we've seen in organizations, at least what from my experience, when we are engaging with external stakeholders, external partners, or external people external to the current organization, we have a lot of planning going on. We do have risk and mitigation plans. We have a lot of monitoring and evaluation plans in place. But when it comes to actually dealing with those things in your own organization, I think there is a huge lack in that. And I think personally that this generally starts, at least in the Indian context. What I have seen is there is a huge lack of understanding workplace boundaries. So there everybody just sort of tends to have a very informal conversation with everybody at all times, and that sort of breaches privacy, that breaches the workplace boundaries that one would expect to have. And as women, at least as me as a woman, when I try to reinforce those workplace boundaries, I probably will not be considered as a team player. I will be considered somebody who is very she's okay, I don't know why she's not cooperative, I don't know why she's not this and that, and you seem like you are being pushed away from the main, quote unquote, main team. So that is what happens. And um I really don't know now. Like you've mentioned that after COVID, we've paced behind by like 100 more years behind now. So I want to be hopeful, but this sort of is a little gives me a sense of a little discomfort. But okay, this was a sort of an inarticulate rant that I made right now, but I will now take you to the questions. How do you address bullying in the work?
I think, Alicia, just before you go there, I just want to comment on what you've experienced. You know, what you've experienced is by and large the experience of many women and many marginalized groups across the world. You know, this is not a Indian specific issue. Patriarchy basically is across the globe. And so the only way to address this is to do exactly what you are doing, addressing it head on with comments that are perhaps offensive, that are outside of the boundaries of the workplace. You know, certain kinds of thinking are not for the workplace. And what I had also said towards the beginning of the talk is that, you know, we cannot only rely on the workplace to influence that. So these changes have to happen in your house, in your religious organization, in your sporting center, in your book club, you know, what in those social spaces. That is where it has to happen for it to filter out. Where we are in South Africa, you know, we also have a very patriarchal cultural structure where you know, the culture is used as an excuse really for the subordination of women. And this has we have to push back on that. And unfortunately, that means that you will not be popular, but your voice means that people in those particular groups who hold those views, they will know how to speak in front of you. And that, my dear, is the major thing. If people can change how they are communicating, what language they are reproducing, it means that over time there will be more Alicias that are brave to say, you know what, this is out of order, this is out of line, this is offensive. And by more people speaking out, policies then become real. So in South Africa, we have very progressive policies, very progressive legislation, but again, we have a very high incidence of gender-based violence, very high incidence of what Arthur is speaking about. You know, where women speak, they are appointed at a senior level, but women's ability to speak in those spaces at the C-suite, which is the CFO, CEO level, at the chief level, women are still being subjugated, unable to find a voice. So I'm very proud of you. You know, you've only been working for 2 years, and you've already realized that there is a toxic workplace culture. And so I commend your efforts as a young woman, and well done to you. So now we can go to the questions. If you can just
Sure,
read perhaps two
sure.
at a time,
How do you
and then I'll
address
try
bullying
to
in the
answer
workplace
two at
when
a
it
time
comes
if
to
that's
women on
possible.
the receiving
Thanks.
end of discrimination? And what would be a solution for women bullying women? Okay.
Okay, I think, you know, we've perhaps already alluded to that. Besides a formal policy around workplace bullying and harassment, for that policy to become real, people have to start doing what Alicia is doing, where you are speaking out against this kind of behavior. And it's not always from the opposite sex. It's often from, you know, women at different levels. It may not be always from senior people. It may be from people who are peers. You know, you come in as, you know, a very excited graduate, you're educated, and sometimes that is not always received well. You know, people start thinking, oh, you know, this person, they think because they have a master's degree, they're better than me, etc., etc. And that kind of harassment, even though it's not, you know, physical, the psychological trauma of that is it can be detrimental, where people suddenly become disengaged. They're no longer motivated to go to work because they constantly get these messages that, you know, they think that they're too smart. You know, with regards to workplace bullying, it's such a sensitive thing. Workplace bullying is not only about, you know, the physical bullying of somebody, or it can be simply somebody not respecting that your working hours are between X and X, and they give you perhaps a project that requires 2 hours, 15 minutes before you need to leave. And here you have to set boundaries and say, thank you very much, I will complete this project tomorrow, or the next day, or, you know, whenever it is that you think is realistically possible. You know, obviously emergencies happen. You know, working in the state space, we have political bodies always wanting things on the turn, and we have to respond to that in real time. It does, however, have an impact on your time, on your personal time, on your well-being, because in your personal time, whether you have a family, whether you don't have a family, whether you have sporting engagements, you're part of particular interest groups, or perhaps you just want to lie down and watch Netflix. This is your time to be you. And so I think, in a formal space, you have to approach your HR to look at a formal harassment and bullying policy. These are often only confused as aimed at women, and often only a sexual harassment policy. This has to be broader so that all people in the workplace are included, and that workplace bullying is not only looked at as a power dynamic. It's not always people at higher levels, oppressing people at lower levels. Sometimes it's your peers. Sometimes it's people who are, at a lower level, trying to intimidate you because they want you out. They want your job, etc., etc. You don't know what the motivations are. But I think that these two things, having a formal policy, but also having a behavior change. And behavior change can only happen, through perhaps, what you are doing here, through a training medium where you're getting messages out, where you're showing tools to people globally of what they can do. But essentially, the behavior change is where the change will be
Sure.
at.
Dr.
Thanks,
Aarti,
Alicia. You can go on
thank
to
you,
any
Dr.
other
Aarti, for
questions.
appreciating something that I've done. Support is the simplest gift we all need, from business all the way to our home environment, and compassion is the key. Absolutely. I would just want to again go back to what we were talking about, and sorry, I sort of mixed up some two questions. I think just 1 second. I think the question disappeared. Probably the participant logged out or something. I'll just go back. Um, okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think I remember what the question was. I can't see it properly, but more or less it was around. Like you mentioned that it cannot be solely relied on the workplace or the upper management all the time. You also need to incorporate the same changes in your social settings as well, and personal social settings as well. And like you said, it's a dinner. It's you're just hanging out somewhere, and you constantly need to reinforce that over there as well. Sometimes I think the question basically, what happens is, people generally point out, saying that keep your politics out of personal engagements. So however, personal is also political. That is something that, at least as gender studies students, that was the first thing that was taught to us. And how do you sort of how would you suggest that we sort of navigate those conversations? Like, if in personal settings it's very difficult to negotiate with family, and it's very difficult to negotiate with people who are not workplace who are not in the workplace, in personal settings especially, it becomes a constant struggle. So how are we supposed to navigate those conversations?
There's no easy way to answer that. All social settings are different. Sometimes you'll have allies where people are like-minded that you can, rely on to support your whatever it is that you're saying. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have matriarchs where it's, older women who have gone through the same kind of gendered politics that younger women have, and they continue the cycle. You'd find that younger women, they don't have any voice, but the older women who have gone through this, especially like in a conservative Indian setting, similar things happen here in South Africa, where at the braai stand, which is like your barbecue stand, people also have the expectation that in a social setting where you are supposed to have a meal together, women have a particular role, men have a particular role. And so the only way to really do it is to have grit. You have to have guts, and you must push back to say that there's no sense in having all of these conferences and a whole lot of budgets from our government into policies and equality projects if in your real space where you live you're unable to speak. And so you have to push your agenda. Unfortunately, again, it's going to make you unpopular. They're going to be like, no, this, we're not going to invite Alicia next time to this particular thing because she's too outspoken. But this is exactly what will be needed. And you'd find that other people in that group may not only be women, maybe people who are feeling oppressed because of their language, because they are marginalized. Maybe they're marginalized not even because of their gender. Maybe they are marginalized because of the area that they come from. Geographics also play a part in how people view you. And so, like for me, for example, I'm like a youngish professor. I'm 40, and so people think that, how did you do this? Why did you do this? And then they question my credibility because I'm a woman who's a professor. But if it was a man who was a professor at a young age, they'd be like, oh, how wonderful, how celebratory. And so I find myself, in my own personal space, I have to constantly defend who I am. So sometimes when I go to meetings, they'll look around like, where's the professor? And I'm like, actually, no, it's me. So, these are things that you have to influence through how you manage it. It doesn't have to be combative as well. You don't have to, go out fighting with guns blazing. You can be very respectful and choose your words in how it is that the setting is. If it's younger people, etc., you can use particular language. If it's older people in that particular session, you will say that, you know what, Dadima, our generation has changed. Women are now doing this, women are now doing that, So you have to think about who your target audience is when you're speaking and try to reach them. And the only way to do that is your behavior, so that you don't come across as, like this hardcore people who are always wanting to just argue and fight. You're actually not. You're trying to say that let's have a different kind of family setting. Let's have men not just, sit around and have a drink whilst we serve them. We don't want that. And you must say things like, this is a different kind of generation that we're raising. And I feel like, even where our children are concerned, the kinds of things that we tell our children, like our gender identity happens from a young age, even from before you are born. Like if you think about, somebody being pregnant, if it's a girl, they buy certain things, they buy certain colors, they buy certain toys, they start giving the baby certain messages. Oh, this baby is going to be so beautiful, this baby is going to be like, and then when it's boys, they will say things like, oh, this boy is going to be so strong, they're going to be such leaders, they're going to have such power. So there's an interesting study that you can Google of a young woman who did a video study of her little girl. So when kids are babies, you can't really tell what they are besides how they're dressed. So she would dress her child as a little girl and then also dress the child as a little boy. And she noticed the messages that that her same baby would get. Coincidentally, it was a little girl. So when she was a girl, they would say things like, you're so beautiful, look at your pretty dress, you're so pretty. They would comment on her aesthetics. But when she dressed her child as a boy, they would say, you're so strong, you're so fast. And so from a young age, people are given messages about how they are supposed to behave. And it's a very heterosexual norm. And these kinds of messages, they stay in us and only addressed when you're at the workplace. So throughout school, throughout your primary or high school, even through university, perhaps there is some conscientizing at university level. But by the time you get into the workplace, those norms and standards have been entrenched in you. And you think that this is how it is that you should behave. This is how men are supposed to behave. This is how women are supposed to behave. And in very conservative cultures, LGBTQI are not even recognized. They in some countries, it is illegal. And so, we have to look at what kind of world do we live in now? What is our role as this generation? Or perhaps not my generation, but like people like Alicia who are, the next generation. What is our role in changing those messages? How do we change those messages? And what kind of things are we saying at things like baby showers? I really don't think that people should be having baby showers. I think they should be having mother showers, because the mother is the one that has the stress of having the baby. They should be having mother showers in my very humble opinion. But anyway, I'm digressing. The point is that the messages that you give in a social setting is perhaps packaged differently than in a workplace setting. In a workplace setting, you're very much aware of your rights as a worker and the boundaries that are there. But in a social setting, look at who's in front of you. And, try not to alienate
the next
people,
question, I think you've answered the next question also. It was around the kind of language that we use when we are trying to negotiate in these conversations. And Personally, I think I can relate to what you said, that you don't need to be actually so angry, and you need but I think it also comes from the pent up childhood, teenage, then almost growing up into an adult angst that we have. And then once we become young adults, then we sort of get an agency through our voice, that now okay, we can voice. And then that pent up anger for all these years sort of comes out as a very it sort of sounds very combating to people who are on the receiving end. But I think with time we'll do better as young adults. We'll definitely get better, and we'll be better at negotiating and having conversations with people. And yes, I think that's all from my end. Thank you. Would you like to make any recommendations? You were recommending us the video study that you were saying. If you could just tell us the name of that, then I will definitely share it with our audience as well.
Sure. I think,
Right.
so I can't remember it specifically, who it was, but it was somebody on social media. Excuse me. I do have a
Right.
book out though that is available on Amazon. It's called Gender Equality at Work. And it's also available on Kindle. So if you just Google Gender Equality at Work, this is actually a book based on my PhD. Because I also realized that, even though you have to write a lot of academic research as a professor, who is using that? It's other academics, and people find it by and large very boring, myself included. So I think, trying to get across to people tools that they can use, I then decided to make something that is usable, that is conversational, and that is in the mainstream. So the book is called Gender Equality at Work. It is downloadable also on Kindle, like I mentioned. But I think that you should also look at, having more courage in your space. And not unleashing 20 years of pent-up frustration on people, but looking at what can you realistically achieve in your workplace, and have a plan for a year, have a plan for 5 years, and think about the longevity that you want to have. Develop case studies so that when somebody, a new Alicia comes in another 10 years, they don't experience what you experience. They will actually feel more included, they will feel more supported, and you don't want that cycle to continue. And that, I think, is my main message. Gender equality at work is achievable, but you must have the elements that I have
Thank you so
outlined
much.
to create that
This is
enabling
personally a very
environment.
enlightening
So
session
thank
for
you
me.
so
I
much
was
for your
very
time and
happy
for
to
my
have you and
inclusion. I really
have
appreciate
had the opportunity to have this conversation with you. Thank you, thank you so much. I'll be also sharing this recording with people who have missed out on this session, and I recommend this to everyone. Please have a look at this, especially people just getting into the labor force participation. This will be a very nice watch. And thank you, Professor Nitasha. I'm just hoping we have more collaborations in the future and we can hear more of you. Thank you so much.